Welcome to Voices Against Violence, Advocacy in Focus, a podcast production of the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Before we dive into today's episode, it's important to note that this podcast delves into the complex intersections of domestic violence with various social and cultural topics. Our discussions will touch upon sensitive and potentially distressing subjects, including domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, as well as power and control tactics. We strongly urge our listeners to prioritize their well-being and engage in self-care while consuming this content.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voices Against Violence, Advocacy in Focus. I am your host today, Abigail, Murat, the Senior Training and Capacity Building Coordinator for the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And today, I'm happy to have Esmeralda Pena. Esmeralda, hi, hello. I'll let you introduce yourself, including your title and what you do here at NYSCADV.
Hi, Abigail. Thank you for having me. I am Esmeralda Pena, and I am the Economic Justice Project Manager at NYSCADV.
Thank you, Esmeralda. It's a pleasure to have you. I just want to ask you everything about economic empowerment and for you to share with me and the listeners about what you do here and a little about what you see in the DV movement in regards to the economic empowerment and what you can share to really support advocates across the state who are supporting survivors.
I have been doing trainings and TAs on economic empowerment. As well, last year we had grantees by the All-State Foundation, where these organizations were providing financial programs to survivors. But, that was last year. So this year, we have been working on implementing new trainings that educate advocates on economic empowerment, like resources as well that are available. Some of these trainings have been posted on our coalition manager that are available for staff that were not able to participate in the live session, so they can see it, review it. They also have access to the resources that were available during the training that we provided. Also, we get TAs on economic empowerment, such as resources that has to do with housing, public assistance, when a client is experiencing any problems with homelessness, or if they are experiencing some specific economic empowerment barrier. And we're able to give suggestions to programs on how they can refer the particular client that they're working with or connect the client with a organization.
Thank you, Esmeralda. And Esmeralda, that's such important work. And I thank you so much for sharing all the work that was done under the All-State Grant and reminding everybody that our resources and pre-recorded trainings live in our coalition manager system. And if anybody wants access to that they can just contact anyone from the NYSCADV team and we will help you gain access. Esmeralda, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know and the team knows that there's a history behind why you've chosen to work with economic empowerment and support advocates and survivors when it comes to economic empowerment within our DV movement. Could you share a little bit about what motivates you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing economic empowerment with survivors for the past, I could say 7 years, but in particular, I have always worked with survivors of domestic violence at an early age. So in overall, I have 16 years of experience. And what motivated me to work in this field and with this population is I'm an immigrant that came here when I was 5 years old to the state. And I was the only child in the family that knew English. So that meant that I had to assist my family members, including my mother, on applying for public assistance, housing, and later in life, after 18, even immigration paperwork, because I was the only person that knew the language, right? So at an early age, I learned what are the struggles and the barriers that people face when applying for public assistance or housing. One of the first thing is they don't know how to fill out an application because they don't know how to read or write, or they don't know the language, right? or even if they were given the application in our language, which was Spanish, they didn't know how to fill it out correctly. And not only was I the one that had to help them with the application, but also attend the appointment. So I got to see at an early age also what are the issues that we face, right, when they go to an organization to apply for public assistance, how long it takes, the questions that are not appropriate to be asked, how they make sometimes people feel they should be ashamed for even applying for something that they need, such as food stamps, to be able to buy food. Also, the barriers that people face when they are applying for housing. Like, you were to think that someone who is barely making and eat meats on a daily basis will not qualify for housing. And they're barely even able to maintain their housing, but they're being disqualified for minor things. I got to see all the barriers that people face. And also when someone that you're close to is facing also domestic violence, and why this person stays in a domestic violence relationship. Not only because of language, but also because this is the only person that can pay my rent, because I didn't qualify last month when I applied for this subsidy. So I have to now stay in this home because I don't have nowhere else to go. I'd rather stay in an abusive relationship and have housing than be homeless, because not everyone wants to go into a shelter.
Thank you. I mean, you said so many things. You touched on why economic empowerment is so important in terms of navigating the different systems and obtaining the subsidies and what survivors may need in order for them to leave if it is that they choose to leave, right? And you also highlighted some of the reasons why they don't leave if it is that they wanted to. And that was because of the lack of access, the lack of understanding, the lack of financial literacy. Esmeralda, let me ask you, in what way does financial education serve as a pathway? You started to talk about it. You talked about it from your own perspective. You talked about how you had to be the translator, how you had to be the person helping navigate your family, especially the ones that experience domestic violence. For the rest of the movement and for survivors and advocates and whoever's listening, in what ways does financial education serve as a pathway for survivors to gain independence and autonomy?
Yeah. That's a great question. Knowledge is power. I always felt that is so true in so many ways. Knowledge is power. When someone doesn't know that there are resources out there for them, they're not gonna go in and look for them. They're gonna feel that they're stuck, and this is all they deserve. So educating clients on what is domestic violence, right? What options do they have if they decide to stay or they decide to leave? How do you create a safety plan for you and for your family if you decide to stay or to leave? Economic empowerment gives survivors or victims options. It gives them the option to either stay or leave, whatever choice they want. Because remember, we are the experts of our law, right? And as an advocate, that I feel like that is so important, because I always used to tell clients when I used to work with clients is, you are the expert of your life, but these are your options. These are your options in family court, criminal court. These are your options with housing. These are your options if you decide to go to shelter. These are your options if you decide to leave out of state. These are the options if you decide to go back to school. These are the options if you decide to apply for public assistance. These are the options if you decide to change positions where you act because you're not safe, right? Because economic empowerment also teaches clients about their rights when they are working, their rights if they are in an apartment and they decide to stay. Because one thing I feel like sometimes the system fails our clients. The system are always also to victimize them again, our clients, right? When a family decides to go to a shelter, because this was what, maybe if they have an ACS case, this is what they said. In order for them to stay with their child, they to go to shelter. But if you come and you tell a client, not necessarily, if you decide to stay in this apartment, these are the things that you can show to your ACS worker that you can keep you and your child safe, because that's what really ACS wants the family to stay safe. So now we're giving them knowledge. Now we're giving them power to also advocate for themselves. Because many times we're not going to be there with our clients. So you need to teach your client how to advocate for themselves when you're not there. When they have to go to family court, and how can they petition for a order of protection? How can they ask for an attorney? How they can say to the court, I don't feel safe, so I need to, can you hold this person so I can leave first and I'm not put in a dangerous situation because I decided to come to court. So again, economic empowerment has so many ways in teaching our clients options, safety planning, and also giving them the freedom to choose what they want to do moving forward.
Thank you, Esmeralda. I just want to clarify for our listeners, we live in such a world of acronyms that it's so easy for us to just throw acronyms out. And for the folks who are listening, just for clarity, when we refer to ACS, we're referring to the Administration of Children's Services, also known as New York City Children. And when we use the acronym CPS, we're referring to Child Protective Services, right? All under the same umbrella. And services in terms of keeping families together or getting families either preventive or foster care services based on what their needs are in the moment. Esmeralda, I want to ask you about, you are so knowledgeable about economic empowerment and economic abuse that I want our listeners to really understand if it is, how do they identify what economic abuse is? Like if I was an advocate and I had a survivor who's not necessarily aware of that language or may not even know that they are experiencing that, what are some of the warning signs? What are some of the things that advocates should look for, and how can they share that information with survivors to really increase their knowledge about what they're experiencing alongside of what they can do to remedy the situation and get on their journey of healing?
That's also a good question, Abby. It's about how you ask questions. How are you asking them? Does your partner sometimes force you or make you do something that you don't feel comfortable, but you end up doing it because if you don't do it, that might be a problem? Such as, I want you to open up a credit card because I need it for whatever reason, but you don't feel comfortable doing it, but you still do it because you don't want them to be upset at you. And so we start talking about red flags, but we also want to do it in a very trauma-informed way because we also have to think about clients' culture as well, right? And what does that mean? Some culture, religion, right? You have to provide this to your husband because you're the wife. So asking them questions about where's this coming from? How do you feel when he says something like this? How does it feel? Or do you feel like if you don't do it, he might harm you or might do something that it's not going to keep you safe after this reaction if you say no? If you say no. How many times does he call you at work? Does he show up at work? Do you feel sometimes he takes your money without your permission? How is your communication on if you guys have joint accounts together? It's about like what are the languages and identifying red flags. But one of the things I always say is trying to be mindful of the client that you're working with, right? Because sometimes even age plays a role. Like teens, right? Teenagers, you have to make sure that how you asking them these questions are not gonna make them not come back to you or feel judged, embarrassed, or that they should be ashamed that they're giving money or opening bank accounts or doing things just because they don't want their partner to leave them or to be mad at them or to hurt.
Thank you, Esmeralda. I hear you saying so much in terms of even what advocates can look out for while it is that survivors are, bravely sharing their stories with them as they're seeking services. and support. And a lot of things that I hear from you is economic abuse can be when somebody doesn't have access to their own money, or if it is that their finances are being controlled by someone else, or if it is that their finances are being used for things outside of their permission, or they're not really weighing in on what their finances are being used, right? Are there other ways that advocates can identify economic abuse potentially while they are listening to survivors and as survivors are sharing their experiences with them?
Yes, especially if they say, I have loans, I have debts. How did you get to these debts and loans? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? When did this start? How did you get to owe all this money? Also, like just asking them, can you talk to me? How do you feel about your finances? Do you feel that you have control over them or that you constantly have to say why you use this money? Do you have control when you go grocery shopping, how much you spend on your groceries? Or do you feel comfortable saying to your partner, I'm going to go out and I am going to use this because I'm going to buy necessary things that you need? Do they question you? Why are you spending all this money? Or they asking you for proof, or they say no when you go and then all of a sudden your money is not there? Have you ever felt like accounts have been opened without your permission because now they have your personal information? Questions like this can be asked. You could get more information from the client when you ask them, can you tell me how this happened? How this makes you feel? It's all about, do they feel comfortable? Do they feel in control? Or do they always have to permission? And they have to explain themselves about their finances.
Esmeralda, you shared so much. And one of the things that you mentioned is you mentioned that there is access to subsidies, public assistance, and et cetera. And folks may not know, advocates and survivors may not know where to go to access those forms, where to obtain those applications. Can you give us a little insight of where those things live and where advocates and survivors can gain knowledge and really look at these applications, prepare to fill out the applications? If there are any insight that you want to provide when filling out these applications and going through those systems to obtain what survivors would need.
Yes, absolutely. Last year, we did a 4-week training on the All-State curriculum. And each of the modules have different modules where we talk about public assistance, housing, how a client can get resources if they want to file for divorce, and what are the pros and cons about they want to get a private attorney or if they want to get an attorney from that can be appointed to them. So in that module, it can be found on Coalition Manager, and each of the modules have different resources on women's law, HUD, if they are in New York City, where they can apply, access HRA. If they're outside of New York City, what is the website that they can go to that they can do it online? But keep in mind that some regions you have to go in person. So all that information can be found on the All States training that we did last year. And also 2 months ago, I had the privilege to do public assistance in New York State. And that one is a more detailed training that has more resources on how advocates can apply for public assistance for clients. Now, in terms of housing, you can go to HUD website and advocates can see what are the different housing options that clients have, such as rapid rehousing, Section 8, and other housing that are available there. So in the HUD's website, you can find more information on housing applications and what are the requirements, because each housing subsidy have different requirements, as well as the public assistance training that I did also goes into details about who can qualify to apply for food stamps, cash assistance, rent assistance, and also if they have an electricity bill, that how they can get help with those bills.
Thank you, Esmeralda. And for those who are listening, HUD is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And if you're looking for that website, not only will it be linked below in the description, but also you can go to HUD.gov New York for New York specific information around what is available with housing and urban developments.
Thank you, Abby. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention is also the training covered about health insurance, because that's very important, right? For clients to have health insurance if they have any medical conditions, and also if they need any medical bills to be paid. The training also goes into details how far they can go to get a medical bill get paid if they get a health insurance. And also if someone is trying to apply for Social Security, and what are the requirements and what are the ages for them to apply for these resources.
Thank you, Esmeralda. If we could shift a little bit, I want to talk about societal stigmas. And so my question for you is, do you find that financial literacy programs play a role in breaking society stigmas surrounding survivors of domestic violence?
Yes, absolutely. I was in a panel a week ago, and I loved what was said there. And I think that's very important. When we educate not only clients, but organizations on what is domestic violence, it definitely takes a lot of stigma. For example, someone said in the panel that they went to a organization trying to get a client an internship, and the person that was in charge of the program said, "But I don't want to bring that here." And she had to get educated on that. There is 1 of 4 women that experience domestic violence. You don't know if your colleague is that one person that is experiencing domestic violence. You just don't know it. So we have to educate people on that. Sometimes you're going to be working with a survivor and you don't even know it. So let's be careful on saying, I don't want to bring this to my work environment, because you don't know if you are already working with a survivor or someone who is experiencing domestic violence. Are you going to keep that person from working with you? Also, to teaching landlords about that they're being discriminated if they find out that they're not accepting this survivor because she has a voucher because she's a DV survivor. Economic empowerment also teaches programs on things to look out for when a survivor is being discriminated by a landlord, or if they're being discriminated in their own workplace, and how they can advocate for themselves at a work environment. Unlike, I have rights to take off if I got to go to court. I have rights to take off if I need to go see my therapist or have to take my children to counseling. And it takes away the stigma that sometimes if someone is experiencing domestic violence, they can work. They're not going to be able to perform their work. Or someone that is experiencing domestic violence are not going to be able to live in my building because this is going to create a problem, which is totally not true.
Okay. Let's talk about beyond like the immediate needs, right? You talked a lot about folks who are in immediate crisis due to experiencing domestic violence coming into a DV program or organization, right? And advocates utilizing what they know about economic empowerment to really increase the capacity around financial literacy and really sharing with survivors what their options are, right? As they go on their journey of healing. Outside of that immediate need, how does financial literacy contribute to the long-term sustainability of survivors when it comes to their independence, their well-being, like long after they are done engaging with organizations and programs and receiving immediate support?
Yeah, one of the things with economic empowerment, you want to teach survivors on how to be independent once they finish a program, how they can maintain their housing that they got, how they can, let's say they now are in permanent housing and now they want to get an education and they want to go back to school, how they can use community where they're living to able to keep them safe, but also if in the future they need assistance if something new were to occur. So teaching about community in your program is so important, because sometimes clients end the program, but sometimes they're not going to be able to continue to work with you because you left. So if you teach them skills on where in your community you could look for someone that can help you if your public assistance case got closed, or if for some reason you lost your employment and you need help with your rent for a couple of months, or now you're facing an immigration situation, what organizations around you can help you with this long-term immigration issue that you're facing now. So economic empowerment programs should always help clients in immediate needs and also long term. Because if not, then we're just going to recycle everything back again. When I say recycle, meaning if you're not teaching clients how to independently look for a job, how independently be able to look for employment in a computer by themselves, teaching them about technology, because now this is after the pandemic, COVID-19, a lot of things are now being remote, right? How to teach a client that doesn't know how to use a smartphone, upload documents for a housing application or a public assistance case, how they can access online courses if they want to go back to school, be a full-time parent, and work full-time. We're teaching them skills so that they could be able to use it in the future.
Is there anything else that you want to share around long-term sustainability of survivors' independence and being that you want folks to know?
Thank you, Abby. Yes, economic empowerment programs and advocates should be helping and supporting clients about how they can continue to gain independence in their finances after finishing a program that they did with you or finishing the services that they did with your organization, right? Because we're not always going to be able to be around clients' life for long term. So if they were able to obtain a permanent housing with you, how are they able to maintain that apartment? How can they use community where they moved to continue to help them if a new domestic violence issue comes up? Or if they're now they lost their employment and they're not able to pay rent moving forward, or how can they go to organizations that have resources to help them with permanent housing situations? Or if they're facing an immigration long-term situation, how they can use the community. Also, where we at now with the way that New York State is so expensive, I think it's so important that you give resources to clients about food, how they can be able to use the food that they're getting to last them for longer. How they can go to pantries that are available for them. What other subsidies can they use monthly that can help them to maintain their monthly food expenses? That's very important. And also, too, there's a lot of funding cuts that have been made since last year that were available during COVID, and they're now no longer available for clients. So keeping in mind, if now these funding cuts is affecting, clients, where they can go to be able to obtain now the help that they lost. So again, economic empowerment programs should be able to always give the tools and skills to clients to be able to use the community where they're in, and also teach them how to be good advocates for themselves if they're facing any legal situation or any housing situation or any employment situation. Thank you, Abby, for that question.
You're welcome, Esmeralda. I know you touched a little bit about budget. If you can just emphasize why budgeting and why advocates should really share with survivors the importance of budgeting and how they can orient them on how to do their own budget outside of the program and organization.
Yes, thanks, Abby. Absolutely. Some of our clients have never budgeted in their entire life. They don't know how to budget. That's what I said in regards to how they can be able to monthly continue to use other resources so they can stay in their monthly budget. Coming up with a budget list, like how much are you getting from this source? And how much are you getting from this source? What are your monthly expenses? And how to save in case of an emergency. Because they're not always going to have us to give them a monthly Metro card. They're not always going to have us to give them a gift card. So why is saving important? And teaching them when to use the saving. One thing I have always used to tell clients when I was doing monthly budgeting with them was, so your savings should be like a bill. Once you pay your phone bill or your rent, you can't go to your landlord, you can't go to your phone company and say, hey, listen, from that $100 that I gave you this month to pay this bill, I'm going to need $50 because that's not going to happen. And then what is an emergency? When is an emergency should be considered? But again, that question will always be different for the person that you're working with, because what can be an emergency to you doesn't mean that's going to be an emergency to them, but for that particular client is an emergency. Always be trauma informed and be sensitive on what they consider to be an emergency.
Thank you, Esmeralda. Yes, you're absolutely right. Because we know that our survivors won't be with domestic violence programs and organizations for their whole entire lives, right? This is supposed to be for the immediate need, and then giving them and building their capacity up in order for them to sustain themselves outside of services. Esmeralda, it's been a pleasure talking to you today and listening to all of the gems that you were able to share with us today on this podcast. I do have one question before we go. Is there anything that you want to share that's coming up within your work here that you want to tell folks about and that they should be excited?
Yeah, thank you, Abby. NYSCADV will be hosting their first Economic Empowerment Summit, June 11. It will be in Albany. This summit will give you the opportunity to meet other people who are doing the work that you do, or if you're interested in knowing how you can start programs that are economic empowerment in your organization. It will talk about how to work with clients that are facing economic empowerment and mental health, right? Because if we're not okay with our finances, we're not going to be okay mentally. So I'm very excited about this summit. Again, it's June 11. We will have presenters. We will have a panel that will talk about the All-State Foundation, how to use the curriculum, and also about workforce, how to work with clients and workforce and employment.
Oh, that is so excited. I can't wait for your first Economic Empowerment Summit, Esmeralda. That is something that I look forward to attending. Esmeralda, I know that folks may be curious listening to you. How do they reach you for technical assistance? If you can share your email address, and then also your email address will be linked in the description below of today's podcast.
Yes. You can email me at EPENA. That's NYSCADV.org. Maybe you have any questions in regards to how do I budget with my client? How can I look for resources on housing with my client, or if they have any immigration issue or want to know about trainings that we already have in place. And you can always contact me if you want to see any trainings about economic empowerment. We can talk about it and we can create them. You are also the experts working with survivors, and you can let us know what are the needs that you are facing in your organization now.
Once again, Esmeralda, thank you so much. And for those who are listening, this will not be the last time that we'll have Esmeralda on the podcast, because having conversations about economic empowerment, financial literacy is not just one conversation. Esmeralda, we look forward to having you back again. And for those who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. This is, again, Voices Against Violence, Advocacy, and Focus. And it was a pleasure hosting you. Until next time.
Voices Against Violence, Advocacy, and Focus is a production of the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. All rights reserved, copyright 2023. A transcript of today's episode will be included in the show notes. Please visit NYSCADV's website at www.nyscadv.org to learn more about our vital work and find resources that can make a difference. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, Please know that you're not alone. Help is available, and there are people and organizations dedicated to supporting you on your journey to safety and healing. To find local domestic violence support, please check out the Find Help directory on the NYSCADV website. Remember, there is hope and there is help, and together we can create a world free from domestic violence. Thank you for tuning in to Voices Against Violence, Advocacy, and Focus.